Hey everyone, so today we're going to look at how we can create and distribute plants or any sort of block instance using Blender and using Rhino. So while this might appear to have taken a lot of manual work traditionally to plant all these vector trees on a landscape in Rhino, and manually placing them is typically difficult, I'm going to show you guys a strategy um, to place them. And in addition to that, I'm going to show you guys how to set up sort of block instances for trees so that regardless of what sort of view you're collecting, you have these tree instances that are kind of relative to that, whether it's an axonometric, a plan, an elevation, and so forth. This is kind of like a very early step of, BIM in landscape architecture, for instance, in terms of at least scattering elements and scattering trees, so you don't have to reproduce drawings, and you can use one master 3D model to kind of create a number of drawings. Something that's sort of helpful into architecture is totally already sort of adapted to using Revit and so on and so forth. We are going to use Blender for this project, and largely what we're looking at right here, I'm just going to switch the display, is an example of the same thing, but I'm just switching my display modes. But again, really quickly, so, and we're looking at the same example here, but this time it's with a 3D tree in Blender, which is kind of better for VFX and so forth. And it's completely parametric and iterative. So if you want to have more or less, if you want to have more or less trees, we totally can. And it's completely responsive to what we're interested in. We can have it all across our site, or we can have it responsive to a number of parameters that we can create that basically paints the landscape. And we're going to paint these trees. And just as a quick example, so if we want to add more trees here, we totally can. And so anyway, that's what we're going to go through today. Sit tight. Hopefully this is valuable, and hopefully you'll learn something. Thanks. Okay, so this is the default Blender interface. There's a ton of videos that I've made now that kind of cover this, but we're just going to kind of clear everything here. So I'm going to select everything by pressing A. I'm going to press delete, and we have a clean workspace now. And then I'm going to press Shift A, mesh, going to add a mesh plane, just like that. Maybe what I'll do next is I'm going to scale it up. If I press N, we can see that the dimensions right now, if you go to item here, you can see the dimensions are 2 meters by 2 meters. And we probably want to make that a bit larger. Let's just, for the sake of this demonstration, and again, we can scale this all up and down later on, but let's just say this is going to be 50 meters by 50 meters. That's a much larger space. And now we're going to go into edit mode by pressing tab, and then we're going to select everything by pressing A again. We're going to right click, go to subdivide, and then we're going to open up the subdivide panel, and then we're just going to go to 50. And that's going to basically subdivide the surface. And the reason why that's important is because I'm going to use a bit of a shortcut. What you guys might want to do if you're, working for the site, or if you're designing a site, maybe what you'll do is you'll go into the sculpting tab and start to sculpt things, and really start working with things like that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly go over and create a quick landscape. So to do that, don't want this, just undo. So to do that, I'm going to go to displace, and I'm going to create a new texture quickly. Feel free to follow along if you want. And then set my strength to 2. I'll go to the texture properties, and I'm just going to quickly use distorted noise, for instance, and you can see what it's starting to do. I'm going to right click it and go to shade smooth, and there we go. We start to have a bit of an artificial landscape. The amount we keep to 1. Maybe the size will make a bit larger, right? I actually need to, I'm going to press Control A and click apply all transformations. Actually, I don't want to do that. I'm kind of happy with it being all sort of scaled up. So you can just play with it until you're kind of happy. There's a ton of different options here. And we're frankly just getting the general outline. You can see it's kind of referring to this image here, and it's just displacing it based on an image. It's called displacement mapping. It's starting to look a bit better. And then I'm just kind of cycling through which one I think I might be good. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to go back to the displacement tab here. and increase the strength a bit. And you can see it's also kind of sharp and pointy, which I don't really want. So I'm actually going to add another modifier, the subdivision surface modifier. And maybe I'll even put that, oh, no, I'll put that afterwards so everything's kind of smooth. There we go. So we have a bit of a landscape going on. I think now looking at this is a bit too much. So what I'm going to do, I'll just maybe increase the size a bit. Do a little bit of that. What's this doing? Yeah, that's pretty good. Maybe cycle through this a bit more. And then last but not least, we can just change the strength, depending on what you want. So we have like kind of a, there we go. Okay, so I quickly created a quick landscape. Maybe I'll just put the back up to 4. This doesn't really matter anyway. And now we want to populate it with our trees. So there's a number of ways we can do that. And there's a number, kind of just depends on whatever trees you want. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to go and get some of my trees that I have saved. I don't really have a particular preference, but one of these trees looks good. So I'll go to deciduous. Just gonna bring this in, append, collection. Okay, so there's our tree. And now I'm gonna get this tree to populate this mesh. So I'm gonna go over to, click the mesh, go over to particle settings over here. I'm going to click a new particle setting. I'll call this Acer tree. Acer tree, name it twice. And then for the particle settings, I'm gonna go to hair. Maybe the number I'll just set to 500 for now, so it's not too many. This tree actually has to go into its own collection. So I just right clicked and press new collection. And then I'm gonna call it tree. I'll just put this tree over here. And so I'm gonna go back to this. And then I'm gonna go to render. And then render as is instead of path, I'm gonna do collection. And when I select, I have to select the collection. So here we go, tree Acer. And just like that. So now we have a kind of forest thing going on. These trees are probably pretty big. We can just go up, we can change the hair length. You kind of get the general idea. And maybe, one thing that's kind of unrealistic about this right now is that this is, you don't really have trees on top of mountains in the same density as you do in these valleys. So we're going to actually change it so that the density of these trees change. And we can do that in a number of ways. So we're going to click this again. We're going to go from object mode to weight paint mode. And then we can change our view quickly. And we'll just change it to something that kind of displays it a bit more. This doesn't really do anything else other than that. Change the display properties. I'm also going to just save this quickly. And then so you can see if I start painting, you can see that I'm starting to create this weight paint on it. Just like that. But so far that hasn't really responded to the trees. So what we have to do is we have to go to here, back to the particle settings, and then we'll go to field weights. Oh, sorry, not field weights, vertex groups. And then where it says density, we can just select the group. And we haven't named the group yet, but you can see there. So now as we start to paint, we're literally painting with the trees. And you can do this based on a view if you want. I mean, I guess, I wonder if this would work, because we just want to paint. I've never done this before, but let's see if we can just paint all the low points and see what happens. Yeah, so it seems to be working. Not sure how well it's working, but as you can imagine, this is kind of slowing my computer down because I'm actively displaying the trees as I do it. Maybe if I turn the tree off. Here, if I turn it off here, you can start to see the weight paint. And You can adjust, just like in Photoshop, you can adjust like the feather and so forth. So here's a lighter feather, start painting all over this thing. It's generally pretty smooth. Obviously, in this example, red means more. So more trees are going in the red. You can sort of start to paint on top of the ridges and such. And yeah, just do it to your heart's content. So this is the kind of the general idea. Just gonna keep. I'm kind of just painting wherever I see a grid, to be honest, because I know that's kind of the base point, and I'm not really attached to it at all. This is more for demonstrative purposes than anything else. Okay, so there we go, and yeah, how about that? That looks good. Again, so this is much better, I think, than having to like manually place all these things. Okay, so we've done that. I'll just do a bit of a sweep. Maybe not on the top of the mountain, but I'll do a bit of a sweep. Nothing too heavy or anything like that, but I'll just do a bit of a sweep. If I turn this back on, you can now see we have our trees, and they're all located um, in the weight painted areas. And again, this kind of feels like a lot of trees. Maybe I'll just step it down a bit. It's totally up to you guys. Keep it to 250. Again, so now I'm kind of seeing, and like this looks kind of higher than everything else, so I'll change it from draw to subtract. It's just up here, just like in Photoshop. And what's kind of interesting is you can see the trees, iteratively disappear as I paint away all these high points and such. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And you can see, sorry, I just went into edit mode, and you can see that this is all procedural. None of it actually exists here. We have just a flat plane and a tree. So we can go out of weight paint mode. We'll go back to object mode. We can see it's still there. Now, if you wanted to render or something like this is pretty much good to go. We can go into rendered view, and you can start to see things. One thing worth mentioning, I mean, this looks pretty good here, but in some instances, the trees, okay, for instance here, this tree is kind of on an angle. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna change it so we're gonna go to advanced in the hair dynamics, which is the particle system. And then we're gonna go to rotation. And instead of our orientation axis being the velocity in the hair, which kind of means the normal against the surface, we're just gonna shuffle through these until we find the one that we're looking for. So orientation axis none appears to be what we're looking for. And now it appears that they're all going straight upwards, which is, relatively what's happening with trees. So again, if we wanted to change our render to cycles, which is the sort of, photorealistic rendering engine, you start to get something, you're starting to get something that looks like forest, a lot of light, or I'll just add like an HDRI sky really quickly so we can kind of see what it looks like with the sky over top. And there you go. But now let's say, okay, so that's great and all, but we can actually, because this isn't necessarily our tool of choice. Our tool of choice is to use Rhino to start to produce our drawings, and then some people might want to go into Illustrator and so forth. So what we're going to change is, instead of this being a tree, we're just going to make a reference point so that we can then bring it over to Rhino and then create a point or extract that reference point and then replace that with a CAD tree. And I can kind of show you guys that workflow. So here we go. I'm going to create a new collection. I'll call this reference. And here we go. I have it selected. I'm going to create I'll create a plane, for instance. I'll just move it over here. I'll rotate it X in the 90 degrees, and then as opposed to having the tree, what I'm going to have instead is the plane. So I'm here, I'll go to the particle settings. I'll just name this, I could duplicate this right here and turn this one off. Actually, I'll just instead I'm going to just hold on to this. Yeah, I'll do this. There we go. So this is Acer tree. So I just copied all the settings over. I'll put this ref. So all the settings are the same now, and then the only thing we're going to change is it's going to be the reference plane. And there you go. What you might notice is also clearly it's smaller. The reference plane is smaller than, oops, I want to get out of cycles for a second here. And so you'll see clearly that the reference plane is smaller and also it's not on the right axis. So I'm just going to apply the transformations. And then now you might see that it's all underneath and kind of disoriented, and it's because there's an origin point. If I select this, you can see that orange point right there is the origin point. So I'm just going to go to Object, Transform, and then we'll go, set origin, and then we go to Origin to Geometry. And then we can unhide things by pressing Alt-H, and you'll see now that the middle point is the point at which this is coming into contact with the surface, which makes it super easy for us. So if I go into edit mode and I start moving this around, you can see how this works. This orange point works as the reference point, which is super handy. So now we know we can basically export this to Rhino, and we can kind of extract the center point of this really quickly. Either Grasshopper or Rhino can do that. Just to make it a bit bigger, just so I'm not having a hard time because I'm not wearing my glasses right now. I will go to hair length, and you'll see. But we know it's scaling from the center point as I scale it up and down, so it doesn't really matter. It's just so I can see it a bit better. Okay, so we have that. We can go to File, Export, and then we'll export it as an FBX. I'm going to name this Forest, and then the transform, this is the one thing you want to change. As opposed to it being negative Z forward, we're going to do Y forward because that's what we have in here, and we also have that in Rhino, and Z will be up. We're going to export that FBX, and then we're going to open up Rhino, and I'm going to create a new, whoops. I'm going to open up a new document. Blender works in meters, so I'm going to open this up in meters. Frankly, it doesn't really matter because actually now at this point, I'm just going to drag in that FBX file that I saved. I'm going to click Open File. No, this doesn't really matter. It opened up in centimeters. So what we want to do is we want to check. We know that we made this 50 meters. So I just extracted the bounding box. I'm just going to check to make sure that this is 50 meters. Yeah. So despite the fact that it opened up in centimeters, it is still the correct scale. And at this point, you can change it to whatever scale you want. Okay. So now that we've confirmed that, we're just going to type show again. You can see that it exported everything. If you really wanted to, you could work with this tree, but we know we're not really interested in that. We have all these planes that we're going to work with, and we can use these to make CAD lines. So we can select these. We can type area centroid, and what you might notice, we can also delete this guy. So what you might notice is that created the area centroid of all these things. So we're just gonna open up Grasshopper. Don't be afraid. This is gonna take like two components. So I've selected them all. I'm gonna go to geometry. I can set multiple geometries. And then I'm just gonna do area. And this is why Grasshopper is so powerful. I mean, like, look at that. Imagine having to do that individually for all of them, right? That would have been a pain in the ass. So I just quickly created the area centroid of all of them. Now I can bake that out. And you can see, I'm just going to solve these surfaces. Okay, I'm just going to hide this, cell mesh, and I'm going to delete those because all I really need are these points. So now we're at this point. We're at this point where I have a number of points on the surface, and we basically want to make like perhaps like a CAD drawing or a CAD tree. And I mean, you could have also done this in Blender, but I'm going to quickly go and bring in a tree. So I can go to blocks. Okay, so I imported these trees, and one thing you might notice is that these trees are kind of special trees. These are custom trees that I made, but essentially what they are is a number of trees from different angles. So here's your front angle, and these are block instances. So I can turn that one off. Oops. There we go. Bear with me for a second here as I set this up. collapse all these. So depending on what angle you want to collect, whether it's, front view, or we can turn that one off, or left view, or, isometric. So if we do isometric, um, these are blocks with basically all of them in it, but you only really need to have one of them on to array it. And I'll kind of explain that to you further. But just in general, understand that this is a block instance with a number of different layers associated with it. And this is kind of like, this is when you're getting kind of BIM oriented in Rhino, or like a BIM mentality where you don't have to like repeat a bunch of drawings when you should be able to do it all from one. So we have these points, and actually I'm going to bring this back into Grasshopper for this last part, because we want to basically take all these trees and we can array them in a sort of random order across these points. So I'm going to select these points, I'm going to go to geometry, set multiple geometry. Now I should mention there's a plugin called Scatter, which you need for this. I'll link it in the description or something like that, but you can get it on Food for Rhino. And the general idea now is that we're going to take these blocks, which you usually can't load into Grasshopper, but we can if we just reference the GUID, which is what this is. So we'll take this, we'll set multiple GUIDs, and then just select them. All you need to know is that means these block instances are now loaded into Grasshopper, despite the fact that you can't see them, because this plugin kind of works. It's actually just telling Rhino what to do. It doesn't actually do it in Grasshopper. And you'll figure that out in a second. I'm going to group these and hide these too. And there you go. You see all these points. So now we need to construct a plane at all these points. So I'll just do, we just need an XY plane, because we know that we don't want them all to be vertical. And so if you look at your XY plane, you can see I can actually increase the plane size. Show selected. And now you can see all these planes are perpendicular to, or parallel, relatively parallel, or just going, it would be perpendicular, or just going into the z-axis, sorry, of the geometry. Now this might take a little bit of playing with, depending, and also we definitely have to show these as a prerequisite for this script to work. So I'm going to plug in this plane into here, and then if I go to preview, there you can start to see the preview. You can play around with the rotation, the scale. I don't want to rotate mine because I've already set mine up to be like BIM oriented. Rotation max 0 again. The scale, I mean, let's just keep it easy and say 1 for everything. So I'll just do 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And there you go. You can even play with the seed if you want. But here we go. So the next thing you know, I'm going to click run. Give it a second. And there you go. So what we have now done is created a landscape with a bunch of trees. And I mean, it's a bit slow right now, so we can just kind of turn those off and move around. Go to our view. So if I wanted to create an isometric, for instance, I can do that. Do this, and then go from my elevation. And we can go to, I went to southwest axonometric. Oops, sorry. Maybe I have this all wrong. There we go. So I have this at northeast. And then to finish this off, to create a pure vector drawing as opposed to a raster drawing, which would be displayed through the mesh, we can just go to contour, create 1 meter contours. Whoops, I don't want to contour that. I want to contour this. Contour 1 meter. Since this landscape is pretty short, we'll do contour, select 1 foot. Oops, and you can see I'm starting to mess this up. Contour 1 foot. And so there you go. We have created this mesh. We can go into isometric view. Then if we turn on these trees, you see that we have these trees in an isometric view. I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to create a section. I'll go into front view, or you know what I'll do, I'll create a clipping plane, which appears to be going right through the object. I'll go to front view, and then if I'm going to display that, I'll turn on the elevation of it. And there you go. So you can kind of get the idea now of the value of having these trees that work in multiple angles. Um, Again, if I want to grab a section perpendicular to this one, I can just do this, go do that, I'll type left, and then to correspond with that, I'll open up the second elevation of the CAD file, and there you go. This is the one that's in the background, so we can hide that. These ones are apparently a little broken, so we can delete those. But overall, you kind of have a system that works. And again, since these are CAD, since these are just vector lines, you can totally turn this into a vector drawing and export it to Illustrator and so on and so forth. What you would want to do, you know, since this mesh is not a vector, you would probably just have to export that and sort of think about different forms of representation for your cut line and so forth. And what other sort of geometry you would have there. But anyway, I see what I deleted now. Those must have been the trees back there. Anyway, so I hope you found this helpful. This same principle applies for, whoops, clipping plane. The same principle applies for if you were doing this in Blender. It's just kind of easier to create contour lines in Rhino, so I tend to do it here. And again, you can do this with any type of object. It can be people, cars, you name it. I generally keep all that stuff, all the BIM-oriented stuff that I've made in a file to kind of do the exact same strategy. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions or any comments, just let me know, and I can try to help you out. Thanks a lot.